this is the first lesson in our e-learning section of part 3. As you know, we're looking at Judith Wright's poem, The Surfer, so we can learn about the craft of writing. So first, let's just look at what stanza 1 says. I want you to note the way the poet relies on her use of language to paint pictures, and the fact that she chose to present her poem as black text on white paper. No distractions with all whiz-bang imagery or anything else. She relies on the power of language and punctuation and word arrangement to paint pictures and to communicate her ideas to you. So, first, let's look at the first stanza. He thrust his joy against the weight of the sea, climbed through, slid under those long banks of foam, hawthorn hedges in spring, thorns in the face stinging. How his brown strength drove through the hollow and coil of green through weirs of water, muscle of arm thrust down long muscle of water, and swimming so went out of sight, where mortal, masterful, frail, the gulls went wheeling in air as he in water with delight. So we're going to examine it now. The title to any text, including any imaginative text that you create for us over the course of Year 12, and definitely for your HSC examination, should you choose to do an imaginative response, the title is really important. It tells us what the focus of the written text will be. And this title tells us the poem is not about a person identified by gender or race or ethnicity, but by the activity the person does. He is the activity. So that's stanza 1. I just revisited that to remind you that poetry is organised in stanzas, not paragraphs. And when you're writing about this poem, it's really important to use the correct terminology. Now, I'm going to take this line by line. He thrust his joy against the weight of the sea. Every word in English is laden with powerful imagery. And unfortunately, as we are learning language, we tend to think that one word means more or less the same as another when it does not. For a skilled writer, words have power. Words are invested with imagery. So what does thrust mean? A thrust is an attack or lunge forward suddenly and forcibly. It has connotations and associations of propelling something with a sharp or pointed end, like a surfboard. And unlike other synonyms, thrust implies the forceful inserting of one thing into another. His joy has a double reference. And I coloured it blue because it's an example of something we call a pathetic fallacy. And it's a type of personification in which human emotion and an object are treated as one thing. His joy in this instance refers to his surfboard and the experience that it brings to him when he goes surfing. Against tells us that there is two-way resistance. There's the pressure of the surfer inserting into the wave, his surfboard into the wave, and there's the pressure of the sea coming back at him. It's not an easy, smooth insertion. It requires force, power, and it requires his body weight. The weight of the sea conveys the heaviness and the density of the sea. And in live lesson, we talked about why Wright chose sea instead of wave, and how meaning of this whole line is changed, and how the meaning of what the surfer is doing is changed because of that change in words to sea. Sea focuses us on the massiveness of the body of water behind the wave. It focuses us on the enormity, the size of the thing that the surfer is interacting with. It highlights the fact that he's small, and then, as in the second last line, he's mortal, he's maybe masterful, but he's also frail compared to the power of the sea. Okay, so now we're going to look at the second line, but I'll put it within context of the first. He thrust his joy against the weight of the sea, climbed through. Climbed is a strong, strenuous movement upwards, moving from one level to another. Slid under those long banks of foam. So to slide, he has moved smoothly, in continuous contact with the wave. And then long banks of foam is a visual metaphor where Wright is comparing the upper section of the wave to a long riverbank. And she uses rural imagery at times in this first stanza to help people who haven't been to the surf, who haven't been to the beach, to have a better understanding of what she's talking about. In brackets, she has put hawthorn hedges in spring, thorns in the face stinging. And she's used, once again, two rural images to help people better imagine what she's talking about if they have not experienced the surf firsthand. Hawthorn, and she's put it in brackets because it's not part of the surfing language that the surfer would recognise. Hawthorn hedges in spring is a visual metaphor where she compares the white foam waves to a hedge covered in white budding flowers. Thorns in the face stinging is a touch-feel metaphor that compares the sting of sea spray in the face with that of the sting of thorns in the face. And those of you who do go to the surf, well, I'm sure, have a strong personal memory of the sting of the spray of waves. He thrust his joy against the weight of the sea. I want you to imagine the meaning of these words now as I'm reading through them. He climbed through, slid under those long banks of foam, hawthorn hedges in spring, thorns in the face stinging. How his brown strength drove his propelling by force in a specific direction. His strength makes it possible for him to overcome the resistance of the wave, and behind it, the massive resistance of the sea that is behind the wave, the sea moving forward in direction when the surfer is going in the opposite direction. So he drives through the hollow and coil of green through weirs of water. Hollow and coil is such a great euphonic sounding phrase. And you will see in this presentation, there'll be visuals to show you what the hollow and coil of the waves looks like. In hollow and coil of green through weirs of water, Wright has used the repetition of the L sound to create a pleasing sound, and she's used the half rhyme of O and I to add to that pleasing sound. She uses sound to emphasize the appearance of the wave. Through weirs of water, once again, she uses a rural metaphor into which she compares a long dam built across a river, and it's built across the river to raise the level of water behind it. She's comparing that low dam to the build-up of water behind the swell of the wave on which the surfer is riding. How his brown strength drove through the hollow and coil of green through weirs of water. Muscle of arm thrust down long muscle of water. Notice the repetition, the emphasis on his strength and the emphasis on the power of the sea. Muscle of arm, this description focuses on the strength of the surfer's arm as he's balancing and is parallel to the line of the wave. Thrust again, she's stressing again how he's forcefully inserting his surfboard into the wave and riding it. Muscle of water is a comparison between the surfer's arm and the huge power of the wave. The description focuses on the strength in each, and muscle of water is an example of personification. The repetition of muscle emphasizes the likeness of the man and the sea as they are one. He's not controlling the water. He is adapting and applying his skill to ride the water, to go with the waves, to go with the sea. At no point in this first stanza do we see him changing, manipulating, reverting the direction of the water. And finally, we're mortal, masterful, frail. The gulls went wheeling in air as he in water with delight. He's mortal because he's destined to die, because we as humans are susceptible to death. He's masterful because of his great ability to use and control and dominate something. Masterful means control. But in the context of this poem, he's not controlling. He hasn't forced the waves to go anywhere. What he is controlling is his own balance, his own movement, his own direction, as he works in harmony, in conjunction with the movement of the waves. He's frail because he's mortal. The repetition of the M and L sounds emphasise the surface qualities as well as the links of him to the gulls. It's another form of comparison. And she's making a point about his flying free, high, above the waves, defying gravity. And the poem ends on the same point as it began. His joy, his delight. The surfer only feels joy and delight. Now, what can we learn about the craft of writing from stanza 1? Well, vivid verbs help readers visualise a reader's actions and give depth to the recreation of an experience. And you may remember in our live lesson, we went through stanza 1 and we picked out all the action words, the verbs, and we talked about how that was appropriate within the context of the poem because she's talking about the surfer and what he is actually doing. Another thing we can learn about the craft of writing from stanza 1 is that every word should paint a picture for the reader, and we pick words carefully and we check the meaning of words because of of the imagery that it will evoke in the reader. Another thing we can learn is the use of comparison and contrast helps readers imagine things they may not have experienced, such as her reference to the rural imagery. The sound of words, the euphony adds to the impact of writing. You know, when you were little people, when you were tiny little children, used to love stories, most of you, used to love the rhythm and the sound of the cat in the hat. All of those Dr. Seuss stories. We have a natural appeal to the music of words. And that's important when you're writing. When you are doing the recursive process of imaginative writing, one of the steps you should do is read your work aloud. Listen to the flow, listen to the rhythm, listen to the sound, and work to achieve euphony. Importantly, a whole experience can be recreated in a few carefully chosen words, and powerful writing can deal with one experience in a person's life. You do not have to write a novel for any of our imaginative writing tasks. You're to pick one moment, be attuned to the detail of that moment, to the distinctive sensory features of that moment, and try and recreate it for us. Thank you. Now go on to the interactive exercises set for lesson 1.